Great. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Mary Moritz, and it's my pleasure to be presenting Clarifying Birthright, Citizenship, and the Tax Credit for American Families Abroad 2026. I'm a volunteer for the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force. I live in France, and I vote in New Jersey. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. Number one, don't forget to fill in the feedback form. Please be sure to do this. We'll share it again several times during the webinar. Your feedback is critical to help us know about the events that we can host in the future. So please do that. Thank you. I have to read, sorry about that. I have to read a disclaimer. So just be patient with me while I go through this. Democrats abroad cannot provide individual tax advice. Advice requires consideration of your individual circumstances and needs, none of which can be done at this event. We are not tax lawyers, accountants, or advisors. Please consult a professional tax advisor, accountant, return preparer when addressing your personal tax matters. Democrats abroad does not endorse or recommend companies or individuals attending or hosting this event. If you are in need of tax advice, you can consult the IRS Tax Return Preparer Directory to find an advisor or a tax return preparer near you or providing online services to meet your needs and budget. Democrats abroad accepts no liability for any actions taken or not taken by participants in this event as a result of information attained at this event or from a participant choosing a preparer either from the IRS directory or based on something someone said or did at this event. And thank you. So the agenda, we're going to spend we just did the housekeeping and the intro. Next, I will introduce our first speaker who will be talking about citizenship. Our second speaker who will be talking about the child tax credit. Then I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about, by doing a public service announcement for Democrats abroad and specifically for the Taxation Task Force. And then we're going to switch over to the live Q&A. I would like to first just take a moment and thank Wyatt and Rachel, Wyatt is the moderator and Rachel is helping us backstage with the IT. And now I will be introducing Charles Lambden, who is an associate at I'll let you at Fagomed, right? So Charles, please take it away. You can turn on your camera and share your screen. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. As Mary mentioned, my name is Charles Lambden. I am a U.S. immigration attorney with Fragman in our London office, where I practice various aspects of U.S. immigration law. And today I'll be happy to speak with you about U.S. citizenship and how children born abroad acquire their citizenship. So, as a starting note as well, I will also just add that today's information is a general overview of how U.S. citizenship is acquired for children born abroad. If you do have any specific questions on a specific situation, we do recommend consulting with an individual, the U.S. immigration attorney, to go over your specific case. So today we are going to start with the application of U.S. citizenship laws and the requirements to obtain U.S. citizenship at birth. There are two separate sets of requirements depending in part upon whether the child's parents are married or unmarried. We'll go over the process of applying for a consular report of birth abroad, also known as a CRIBA, and a U.S. passport at the U.S. Embassy or consulate. And then for children who do not acquire U.S. citizenship at birth, we'll also discuss potential alternative routes to citizenship, both through grandparents and through a process called expedited naturalization. Questions of U.S. citizenship depend on the law in place at the time of a child's birth. While the current U.S. citizenship law was enacted in 1952, it's been amended at various times since then, with significant changes in 1986 and 2017. Therefore, when looking at what law applies to a child's citizenship and whether they acquired it at birth, you do need to look at the date that they were born and then what law was in place at the time of their birth. Additionally, for children who acquire U.S. citizenship at birth, they are U.S. citizens automatically. There's nothing that the parents have to do to request it or obtain it. Um, a U.S. passport and a consular report of birth abroad only serve as evidence of the U.S. citizenship. Additionally, if a child's a U.S. citizen and you want to travel to the U.S., the child must enter the U.S. on a U.S. passport. It is illegal for any U.S. citizen to try and enter the U.S. on another country's passport. So, for children born abroad to parents who are married, there are specific sets of requirements for the parents to pass on their U.S. citizenship. If both parents are U.S. citizens and are married, at least one parent must have resided in the U.S. before the child's birth. At least one parent must have a biological connection to the child. And then both parents must show a parental relationship to the child. If only one parent is a U.S. citizen at the time of the child's birth, that U.S. citizen parent must have been physically present in the U.S. for at least 5 years before the child's birth. 2 of those 5 years must be after the age of 14. Importantly, this time in the U.S. can be calculated in the aggregate. It does not have to be continuous. Additionally, the U.S. citizen parent does not have to have been a U.S. citizen at the time they were in the U.S. They can have been in the U.S. on a work visa or as a green card holder or any other status that may apply. Similar to the above, at least one parent must have a biological connection to the child, and then both parents must show a parental relationship to the child. Now, for children born abroad to U.S. citizen parents who are not married, there are some slightly different requirements depending on whether both parents are U.S. citizens, whether only the mother is a U.S. citizen, and then whether only the father is a U.S. citizen. If both parents are U.S. citizens, at least one parent must have resided in the U.S. prior to the child's birth, and the U.S. citizen father must meet various requirements, including having legitimized the birth, agreeing to provide financial support for the child until the age of 18, and they must have a parental relationship with the child. Alternatively, the U.S. citizen mother must have been physically present in the U.S. or its territories for a continuous period of 1 year before the child's birth. Please note that this is different than the typical physical presence requirement that can be counted in the aggregate. The mother must have been in the U.S. for a continuous period of 1 year before the child's birth. Now, if only the child's mother is a U.S. citizen and the parents are not married, there was a change of law in 2017, and the mother must have been a U.S. citizen at the time of the child's birth, and the mother must have been physically present in the U.S. for at least 5 years, 2 of which were after the age of 14. This is the typical physical presence requirement that can be counted in the aggregate, and the mother does not have to have been a U.S. citizen at the time of their presence in the U.S. If the father is the only parent that's a U.S. citizen, there are some more onerous requirements that have to be met. There must be a blood relationship with the child. The father must have been a U.S. citizen at the time of the child's birth. They must agree to provide financial support for the child until the age of 18. They must legitimize the child's birth before the age of 18. Typically, this is when the parents subsequently marry, the father acknowledges paternity in writing under oath, or the paternity is established by a court. Then finally, the father must meet the same physical presence requirements, having been in the U.S. for at least 5 years, 2 of which were after age 14. Again, this can be calculated in the aggregate, and the father does not have to have been a U.S. citizen at the time. Now, for the process of applying for a child's U.S. passport and consular report of birth abroad, there's essential documents that the parents need to have available to apply for these, the passport and the CRIBA. They will need proof of the parent's U.S. citizenship. This is typically a U.S. passport, a U.S. birth certificate, or a naturalization certificate. They'll need evidence of the parent's physical presence in the U.S. Typically, this involves school records, tax returns, or employment documents demonstrating their time spent in the U.S., but there's no specific category of documents that are required here. If a parent has spent various periods of time in the U.S. that they're counting in the aggregate, other document types can suffice as well to evidence that time spent. Further, if the parents do not bring enough documents, the embassy will request more in order to calculate the amount of time spent in the U.S. and ensure it meets the 5-year requirement. For children who acquire U.S. citizenship to parents who are married, parents will need to provide their marriage certificate to demonstrate that requirement is met. And then finally, documents must be originals or certified copies, and you should make sure you bring the number of copies requested by the embassy or consulate for the appointment to ensure smooth processing. Now, a consular report of birth abroad. This is a formal document issued by a U.S. embassy or consulate that certifies the child acquired U.S. citizenship at birth. You must apply for this before the child's 18th birthday, and it's best practice to apply as soon as possible after the child's birth while documentation and information are fresh and readily available. Oftentimes, the application form can be completed online and documents uploaded for embassy review before an in-person interview. At the same time, parents can apply for the child's U.S. passport using Form DS-11 when they complete the online CRIBA application. Again, best practice is to apply for both of these items at the same time during the same appointment, as U.S. citizen children must enter the U.S. on a U.S. passport, and you will want to account for embassy processing times. In appropriate circumstances, an emergency U.S. passport can be issued at the CRIBA appointment, but whenever there's enough time to plan in advance, it is recommended to go ahead and apply just for a regular passport at the CRIBA appointment. Finally, parents can apply for a child's Social Security number during the same application, and then the card will come back directly from the Social Security Administration. After the application documents are submitted and any supporting materials uploaded where possible, the embassy or consulate will ask the parents and the child to schedule an in-person interview in advance at the embassy or consulate in the jurisdiction where the child was born in order to finalize the CRIBA and passport applications. Non-U.S. citizen parents do not have to attend this appointment so long as they submit a notarized consent form, so this is an option as well if needed. After the interview, if the embassy or consulate does not need any additional information, they will process the CRIBA and passport applications and then return the documents to the parents based on their specific return processes. Then again, the child's Social Security card will come directly from the Social Security Administration. So up until now, we've been discussing how a child acquires U.S. citizenship at birth from their U.S. citizen parents, and then the process of applying for the CRIBA and the U.S. passport. There are instances, however, where a child does not acquire citizenship at birth. For example, if their parent was not in the U.S. long enough to meet the physical presence requirement. As an alternative to acquiring citizenship at birth, there are two other ways to obtain U.S. citizenship. The first is based on a grandparent's physical presence in the U.S. If the following conditions are met, A U.S. citizen parent or another individual in certain cases can file what's known as Form N600K with USCIS, the Immigration and the Agency in the U.S., and request the child's U.S. citizenship and a certificate of citizenship. One parent must, of course, be a U.S. citizen. Then the U.S. citizen grandparent that the application is based on must have been physically present in the U.S. for at least 5 years, 2 of which were after age 14. And then this amount of time can be counted in the aggregate, and the grandparent does not have had to be a U.S. citizen at the time if they were in another status. The child must be under age 18 when this occurs. They must reside outside of the U.S. with their U.S. citizen parent. And then after filing of the form, USCIS will ask the parent and the child to attend an in-person interview, and the child must be lawfully admitted to the U.S. in order to attend this in-person interview with the parent, and then an oath swearing ceremony if they're over the age of 14. Alternatively, for children who enter the U.S. on what's known as an immigrant visa, and they intend to permanently reside in the U.S. with their U.S. citizen parent, they must have at least one U.S. citizen parent. They must be a lawful permanent resident of the U.S., which typically they would become when they enter on the immigrant visa. They must reside in the U.S. in the legal and physical custody of the U.S. citizen parent, and these requirements must be satisfied before the age of 18. If satisfied, the child will then become a U.S. citizen. So, in summary, children born abroad to U.S. citizens will acquire U.S. citizenship at birth, depending on their parent's citizenship status at the child's birth, and then the amount of time spent by at least one U.S. citizen parent in the U.S. Citizenship acquired at birth is automatic. A CRIBA and/or U.S. passport only serve as evidence of the citizenship. U.S. citizenship acquired after birth but before the age of 18 is not automatic. Parents must take an affirmative step to request it and obtain the U.S. certificate of citizenship. Finally, parents should apply for a CRIBA, U.S. passport, and Social Security number as soon as feasible after a child's birth, while information and documentation are readily available. They will need to ensure that they account for any passport processing times, although emergency passports can be issued at the CRIBA appointment in appropriate circumstances. I've also provided some citizenship abroad resources for anybody who has additional questions as well and needs more information. You can visit the U.S. State Department's website on U.S. citizenship for children born abroad. You can check the website of the embassy or consulate in the area where your child was born, or even your local one, just to get started. And then I've also included my contact details below. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And again, just to remind all of our attendees that this presentation will be part of the resources that we give you when we get everything online. So thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Oliver Wagner, who is from 1040 Abroad. Excuse me, Olivier. I apologize. I'm so sorry. Olivier, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes. Let me share my slides. Great. I'm Olivier Wagner. I'm the CEO of 1040 Abroad. I prepare tax returns for Americans who live overseas. And that's a topic that is kind of a drag. That's having to file tax return is the aspect of US citizenship that most of us, don't like. And I'm here today to speak about the additional child tax credit, which brightened that topic because that's the only tax credit, refundable tax credit, that you're entitled to without having contributed to the US tax system, without having made estimated tax payments. So you can actually receive a refund from the US government by virtue of qualifying for the additional child tax credit without having contributed. Before jumping into the topic of the additional child tax credit, I will speak about a few myths that people have that regard US taxation. The first one, which are not people who contact me because they believe they don't have to file a tax return, is that they don't have to file US tax returns or pay US tax by virtue of living overseas. And the US is unique in that regard, in that they require US citizens to report their worldwide income regardless of where they live. In many cases, they don't have to pay US tax, but they still have to file. I put references to the Internal Revenue Code, saying that as per IRC1, IRC61, you will have to report all of your income. By exception, non-resident aliens are only taxed on US income. So if you don't want to have to report your worldwide income, you can renounce US citizenship, which is not the topic of today's presentation, but feel free to send me an email and we can discuss that as well. The second one, that's actually something that I get from my clients and prospective clients, is I don't have to file because I earn less than the threshold. And that's actually true. If you make less than the standard deduction, you don't have to file a tax return. In 2025, for single filer, that standard deduction comes up to $15,750. The issue comes up when that's not the threshold they have in mind. They have the foreign income exclusion limit of $130,000 in mind. So they think they don't have to file a tax return because they earn less than $130,000, which is not true. You would have to file a tax return. You would have to file Form 2555 to claim the foreign income exclusion. So if you make less than $15,000, you will not have to file a US tax return. If you make less than $130,000, you still will have to file a tax return and then claim the foreign earned income exclusion to get the foreign earned income exclusion. Right. So based on this myth, there's a lot of people overseas who are not filing US tax returns. The IRS is aware of that, and they created a program for people to get into compliance. It's called the Streamlined Foreign Offshore Procedure. It requires the filing of 3 years of tax returns and 6 years of FBARs. The requirement is that you must have met some sort of physical presence test, which ties up to the foreign income exclusion physical presence test, meaning that you spent at least 330 days in a foreign country in one of these 3 years. So for the audience of today's webinar, you live overseas, even if you traveled a bit to the US in one of the 3 years, you still have the other years. You just need 1 year in which you spend at least 330 days in a foreign country. And the Streamlined Foreign Offshore Procedure is the way to get into compliance. It abates any penalties, failure to file, failure to pay penalties. In many cases, you wouldn't owe tax, which means that you would not have these penalties. Still, there's the potential for FBAR penalties to be assessed. FBAR is the foreign bank account reporting. If you have more than $10,000 in foreign bank accounts, you would have to file an FBAR. The penalties are unlikely to be assessed, but they're very substantial, going up to 50% of the account balance in the case of a willful failure to file an FBAR. The Streamlined Foreign Offshore Procedure gives us protection against all penalties and the FBAR penalties in particular. Right. The topic of today's presentation is the additional child tax credit, which results in a refund. There is a statute of limitation on refund, meaning that you can request a refund up to 3 years after the original deadline of your tax return. These 3 years just happen to match the 3 years that you can file under the Streamlined Foreign Offshore Procedure. So as of right now, you will file 2022 through 2024 as part of the streamlined foreign offshore procedure and file a timely filed 2025 tax return on top of that. Past the statute of limitation, the IRS would not be authorized to issue that refund. So you can no longer claim refunds for years before 2022. Right, the additional child tax credit is a good surprise for expats that kind of offsets the drag that filing a tax return is. You don't owe any tax to the US and you still get a refund. I'm particularly referring to the additional child tax credit, which is a refundable credit of $1,700 per child per year. An additional $500 of non-refundable credit is called by the name of the child tax credit, but just like any non-refundable credit, we're less than interested in those because Americans overseas, especially those who live in Europe, Canada, Australia, where the local income tax rate is higher than the US tax rate, these people would be able to not owe any US tax by using the foreign tax credit or foreign income exclusion, meaning that any non-refundable tax credit will not really be useful because you already got down to $0 of tax owing. The additional child tax credit, $1,700 per child per year, is refundable. You will get an actual check from the US government. One limitation is that you cannot claim the additional child tax credit if you're using the foreign income exclusion, which becomes an issue for those who live in countries where the local income tax rate is less than the US. If you were to live in Hong Kong, Singapore, or the Middle East, you wouldn't have enough foreign tax credits to bring your tax owing down to zero. You would have to use the foreign income exclusion, but that would prevent you from claiming the additional child tax credit. Right. So foreign income exclusion allows you to exclude $130,000 of earned income. This can be self-employment income or wages. This would be claimed on Form 2555. Right. Publication 54 as well as IRC 24 clarifies that you cannot use the foreign income exclusion when claiming the additional child tax credit. You need to have earned income to claim the additional child tax credit, and an income excluded using the foreign income exclusion no longer qualifies as earned income for that purpose. Right. The alternative is the foreign tax credit. The foreign tax credit gives you a dollar for dollar credit for taxes paid to a foreign country. It's a lot less restrictive. There's no condition of residence. Essentially, you need to have foreign earned income and pay tax to a foreign country. For personal services, i.e. wages or self-employment income, the sourcing is based on where you're located when the work was performed. So even if you have a US employer, even if you're paid into a US-based bank account, the income would still be foreign sourced. You will still be able to claim the foreign tax credit. As I mentioned, that works well for those in Europe, Canada, Australia, where the foreign tax rate is higher than the US tax rate, meaning that that will bring your US tax owing down to zero. Right. So if you were to use the foreign income exclusion, the best case scenario is that you get down to zero. You would not have the additional child tax credit refund. You also would not have any benefit in future years. With the foreign tax credit, you will get the additional child tax credit refund, $1,700 per child per year, and the excess would also be carried forward in the future. So for instance, if you you're in Germany, you're paying German income tax, you're paying $50,000 of income tax to Germany, you owe $30,000 to the US, you will get a 30,000 foreign tax credit in the current year to offset your US tax liability. The excess $20,000 can be carried forward in future years. This means that if you were to take advantage of some provision of the German tax code, you would be able to use this carry forward foreign tax credit. Likewise, if you were to move to a jurisdiction that has a lower tax rate, you will still have this foreign tax credit carryover to offset income in future years. Right, so the amount is $1,700 per child per year. That's the amount in 2025. It is indexed on inflation. As I mentioned, you need to have earned income to get the full amount of $1,700. You need to have about $14,000 of earned income. The way the formula works is that it's 15% of your earned income in excess of $2,500. Once you reach $15,000 of earned income, you get the full amount of $1,700. Right, so people tend to like the foreign income exclusion. Form 2555 is easier to understand than Form 1116. The questions are in plain English, and people love to just exclude that foreign earned income. And again, if you were in a country where the tax rate is less than the US, the foreign income exclusion might be best. But just because it's easier to understand doesn't necessarily mean that it's your best option. If you were in Western Europe, the foreign tax credit is probably a better option for you, especially if you have children. Right, so that's your example. Foreign income, the foreign income exclusion gets you down to zero, whereas the foreign tax credit will allow you to get a refund of $3,400. Right, so that's essentially that. I will join the Q&A for any question you would have. Based on the questions that were already submitted, I made 2 more slides. The first one, I had someone who asked a question. They were scared of going to the US because they don't have, the child doesn't have a social security number. As Charles mentioned, you can request the social security number when you report the birth in the consulate. But even in a future time, you would contact the FBU office, which is the Social Security Administration inside of a US consulate. So you will contact them instead of having to deal with the US consulate on US soil. And for people under the age of 12 years old, you wouldn't necessarily need to show up in person. And then kind of the opposite of the presentation that Charles made, I have people who don't want their child to be recognized as a US citizen. They don't want their child to have the burden of having to file US tax returns, and they want to just not report them to the US. And while there is a chance that the child could stay under the radar, the better option is to report the child, get a social security number, claim the additional child tax credit, save that money for the child's benefit. And once the child turns 18 years old, he or she can decide to renounce US citizenship and properly be out of the system. All right, so that was 2 questions that I saw based on the comments that were submitted before the presentation. I will exit my presentation. If you have any question, feel free to contact me at owagner@1040abroad.com or use the contact form at 1040abroad.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivier. Really, really fascinating information.
Thank you.
So now that our speakers, Olivier and Charles, have finished up their presentations, we're going to open the Q&A. on the bottom. If Rachel, if you could do that, that would be great. And you'll be able to ask your questions. Not only should you ask questions, but then as is the Q&A open? I don't see it.
It is open.
Okay.
I've just merged it to the meeting window. Does that help you?
Okay. I've opened it here. So we'll see if the questions start coming in. Here we go. So please remember not only to ask a question, but then go in and upvote questions so that we can answer the questions that seem the most pertinent this evening. We have a good amount of time ahead of us, so we should be able to get to a lot of the questions, which is really good news. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and do a bit of the PSA for Democrats abroad as we're waiting for the questions to come in. So let's see here. Democrats abroad. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Democrats abroad and specifically the Taxation Task Force does for you. So the Democrats abroad, the Taxation Task Force is made up of volunteers from all over the world, and we work hard to reform the tax and financial access problems for Americans abroad. Some of our advocacy work includes advocating for a switch to residency-based taxation, eliminating FATCA reporting for Americans abroad in our country of residence, exempting business owners abroad from the transition and GILTI tax, and much more. And you can check out more about our advocacy work by going to democratsabroad.org/taxation. What does Democrats abroad do for you? Well, some of the things that we do for you include writing the tax and financial access report on Americans abroad that we did in 2022. Helping host tax and financial education events like this one all over the world. We submit statements for the record to congressional hearings, and we do regulatory comments. We do candidate reach out and education, as well as visits to Washington, D.C. to talk to Congress, the IRS, and the Treasury. Our most recent trip to DC was last October during the shutdown, believe it or not, and we were able to meet with over 400 congressional offices across the aisles. If you would like to read our report, this was based on feedback from over 7,000 Americans abroad about the tax and financial problems that we face. The people we heard from said that after reading the report, they felt more educated and less alone in dealing with the problems we face with taxes in particular. And there's also a section on the FBAR. So go to democratsabroad.org/2022_report to read it today. Here is a list of this year's Global Tax Webinar Series that we've put together. This is the third webinar in a total of 8 this year. You can watch the recordings from the previous webinars with a donation of as little as $7.50, depending on the event. 2 events are free, including this one. And you should see a link in the chat box now to go to the website to access these recordings and to register for the upcoming ones. And here you can see next week we have retirement and taxes. February we have how to avoid double taxation, investing, doing the FBARs, and then finally catching up with the filing. Many country committees also do country-specific tax webinars, and you can find them by going on the website and looking up your country and see if they have any tax webinars. Right now, we have one in Canada happening, and in March, Switzerland is just going to have a party, and they're doing many tax webinars in Switzerland in March. Let's talk a little bit about residence-based taxation. Some of you may or not be aware that a bill for residence-based taxation was introduced in December 2024. That was during the last session of Congress. We specifically continue to advocate for a bill to help address the tax problems for Americans abroad. This is a top priority for us this year when Congress intends to pass a lot of new tax laws. There are many resources on our website to educate you more on this, and the links are in the chat box now for those too. In the chat box, if you click on the link, it will open up into a window in your browser. So you can't copy and paste, but you can click and open up a browser window. That'll help you. That'll bring you to the residency-based taxation webpage that we have dedicated to that. Voting. Let's talk about voting. I would be remiss if I did not mention this at all. And this is an extremely important issue for all of us, and specifically Democrats abroad. We are focusing on this year. It is one of the most powerful things you can do as an American citizen living abroad, especially this year, because it is a midterm year. We know there is a lot of fear-mongering happening by the current administration, and they are signaling that they want to repress the vote, they want to repress absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, inflict tariffs, etc. You name it, there is chaos, and it's daunting to look at the news right now. But the fact is, they want you not to vote. That's the whole point of what they are doing. And the best thing that you can do is to stop them in their tracks and help save America and to help reform the tax laws is to vote. Some people think that their vote from abroad doesn't matter, but I will tell you why it does. First, it doesn't matter if you vote in the reddest of red states or the bluest of blue. Every vote from abroad matters. Many elections now are won by a razor-thin margin, and it's the votes from abroad that make a difference in those tight elections. Secondly, we don't know the exact number of people who live abroad, but we do know how many people vote from abroad, since those votes are counted in each election. And then we take those numbers and we walk into congressional meetings and we share that data with the tax writers. And most people actually don't even know that they have constituents living abroad. So your vote helps us get the American abroad issues prioritized so that we get the laws reformed sooner than later. Again, the number one thing you can do this year is to help us is to vote. Even though it isn't a presidential election year, we can vote Trump out. We can vote his Republican allies out in Congress. There are also key state level races, and that will help protect the rights of your friends and family back home. And so please go to votefromabroad.org to register today if you haven't already done so. And you can also email voterhelp@votefromabroad.org, and someone will be more than happy to help you out. So, what are 7 small actions you can take to help improve the tax system? Well, you can request your ballot, you can read the tax report, you can share your tax horror story with members of Congress, and we have instructions on how to write your members of Congress and talk to them and explain to them the challenges that we have living overseas. You can join Democrats Abroad, it's free. You can boost your donation for this webinar by giving us an extra help. And you can sign up for the tax mailing list if you haven't done so already by going on to our website and finding the Taxation Task Force sign up. And the last thing you can do is volunteer. You can find yourself helping out with a bunch of absolutely dedicated people trying to get the vote out, trying to change specifically our tax and financial situation abroad. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to start the Q&A. Olivier, Charles, if you'd like to turn on your cameras now. And are you both able to access the question and answer box? It's down on the bottom. You can put it up, and then what you have to do is sort of toggle, there's most recent and then there's most up votes. And so I've toggled most up votes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the questions as they come in, and I'm going to continue to refresh that, and I will read you the question that has the most up votes at the time. The first one right now we have is there a limit on the time frame that we can utilize the child tax credit? I was told by my tax preparer that I can only use this strategy for 5 years, but I question if that is true. This one's probably for you, Olivier.
Yes. Well, there is the 3-year statute of limitation. So if you only found out about it now and your child is 15 years old, you can only go back 3 years. But if you file on time, you can file for 17 years. There's no 5-year limit. The other limit that I didn't mention is that the child needs to have a valid social security number for the year in question. So if you apply for a social security number now, then you will be able to claim it going forward, but you wouldn't be able to claim it for the years in which the social security number was not issued yet.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. I was born and lived in the USA until I was 22. My wife is German and has never lived or worked in the USA. Are my 2 children, who were born and lived their entire lives in Germany and don't have US citizenship, required to file US taxes and report their foreign bank accounts?
Right. No, someone who's not a US citizen, does not have a green card or otherwise meet the substantial presence test, would not have to file a US tax return or an FBAR.
Okay. Charles, do you want to say anything about this situation?
No, I don't think I have anything to add, in that respect, since it sounds like the children don't have U.S. citizenship. I would just say, if you grew up and lived in the U.S. until you were 22, you may just want to double check that they did not acquire citizenship at birth, because that would be automatic. Even if you never applied for a U.S. passport or a CRIBA, that's probably the only thing I would make sure you confirm.
Okay, great. Next, we opened an investment account for our 1-year-old in Germany. If he obtains U.S. citizenship, would he be subject to the same tax obligations and investment-related restrictions that apply to adult U.S. citizens?
Yes, you would have to report the investment income is a US citizen. Yes, to report his income. In the case of a child whose only income is investment income, you can report it on your own tax return. So you might not need to file a tax return. You can instead report it on your own tax return. It's something that is referred to as the kiddie tax. But yes, the income would have to be reported. And if you're paying income tax on that income to Germany, you'll be able to claim you'll be able to claim the foreign tax credit to the extent the German tax rate is higher than the US tax rate. You will not have actual tax owing on that. But yes, you have a US citizen with investment income. The investment income would have to be reported one way or the other. The child does not have to file a tax return. You can alternatively report income on your own tax return, something that's referred to as the kiddie tax.
Okay, great. I've always filed my taxes. Is it still possible to get the ACTC for 2022, 2023, and 2024 years when I filed with the foreign income exclusion, not realizing the FTC option?
Yes. It's not too late. You can amend this return and claim the additional child tax credit on an amended tax return. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Next, when does a child have to fill in their own return?
That would be once they earn more than the standard deduction of $15,000.
Can I ask a question? Because you said that the income, right, their own return. Okay, so but
Right.
any investment income can be filed on the parents, under the parents.
Right. Once they have earned income, they have a job, they earn more than $15,000 would be when they have to file their own return.
Okay, thank you. What can we do if we don't want our children to become U.S. citizens? Is it enough to do nothing? We have never registered them with any U.S. entity. They have no U.S. passport. Two other passports, almost other citizenship in the world seem to have one advantage. No social security number. I have never mentioned them in my tax report, never applied or received any kind of U.S. tax benefit. We are living in Germany and plan to stay here indefinitely.
So that goes to the question of whether they acquired U.S. citizenship at birth. You need to look and see if those requirements are met, because if so, then the children will automatically be U.S. citizens, even if you have never mentioned them on any formal documentation, applied for a U.S. passport, that sort of thing. But if they could qualify for citizenship under a different route where you have to take affirmative steps, that would be different, and they wouldn't necessarily be U.S. citizens automatically.
Okay, great, thank you. Do we qualify for additional child tax credit if she was born at the end of 2025?
Yes, you will get a social security number and you'll be able to claim it starting in 2025, yes.
Next, I am a self-employed American living in Spain with a Spanish spouse. I have been told mixed things in the past, especially that my self-employed income does not qualify as earned income. Whoops. I've lost that question.
I can see it, Mary. Would you like me to read it?
Could you please? Yes.
Sure. And there's actually one above it as well. I'm a self-employed I am a self-employed American living in Spain with a Spanish spouse. I've been told mixed things in the past, especially that my self-employed income does not qualify as earned income, therefore making me not eligible. Now the view has jumped on me. I think I can get it back.
For the ACTC, right?
Go.
Is there any truth to this, or can self-employed workers also qualify?
Yes, absolutely. Self-employment income is earned income. I can see where the confusion is coming from. For people who have 3 children or more, there are alternative way to qualify based on paying social security tax. And someone in Europe, in a country that has a totalization agreement with the US, would not pay US social security tax. So I see where the confusion is coming from, but that's an incorrect statement. If you're self-employed, you have earned income, you can claim the additional child tax credit.
Okay, great. Next question. Regarding citizenship of my upcoming child, do my 5 years being in the U.S. mean fiscally living inside the U.S. or on holiday and visiting U.S. family?
So for the 5 years physical presence test, it's not necessarily residing in the U.S. It's just physically being there. So, if you spent time in the U.S. over a certain period of years, and in the aggregate, it reaches the 5 years, 2 of those being after the age of 14, then that should suffice.
I'm going to ask a question. I always understood that I needed to save my children's passports and to prove at least entry. How do you recommend that people prove the physical presence test?
So that's when it just depends on the nature of your time spent in the U.S. For people who grew up in the U.S., they'll probably have things like school records. If they went to, say, camp or different types of events, any sporting events, things like that, things that you kind of collect when you grow up. But if you spent time in the U.S. For sort of different reasons, whether it's visiting family, attending camp, maybe you did some school in the U.S., but you did not grow up there, you have to start looking for other types of documentation that evidence your time spent in the U.S.
Okay, thank you. So it appears that Oops, sorry, I'm going to go to the next one. My 7 and 10-year-old girls, both born in the UK, have not been reported to the US for citizenship or Social Security. I thought I'd be able to leave the decision up to them, but I'm not sure I can based on your talk. The mom is Swedish, has lived in the UK for 22 years, is not a US citizen, and never lived in the US. I'm the father. I haven't lived in the US for 20 years. Mom and I are married but separated. I have filed my US taxes and FBARs, but only as a sole person, never jointly. Are the girls US citizens or not? If so, I'm guessing they should get the US passports to travel to the US and file US taxes until they renounce citizenship.
I think maybe we can address the citizenship question first, just because that would impact the tax question. But this is another one. If your children meet the requirement of having acquired citizenship when born abroad through you, then they'll be citizens automatically, and you can go ahead and apply for a U.S. passport and a CRIBA with the embassy in London if you're down here, and then from there they'll be US citizens, and if they want to renounce, they can do it sort of as they approach the age of 18. But that's sort of a different process.
Okay. Olivia, would you like to add anything to the?
No, they'll be US citizens, the same rules would apply.
Okay. So it appears that under current U.S. law, a child born abroad to a Spanish mother and her spouse, who's a U.S. citizen woman, would acquire U.S. citizenship at birth, provided the U.S. citizen parent meets the physical presence requirements. Can you confirm that this is correct?
Yes, so generally speaking, that should be correct. As long as one parent is a U.S. citizen, and they meet, the various requirements for children born abroad to one U.S. parent, then that should be sufficient to meet the requirements. Should be nothing further there.
I'm going to ask a question because the slides that you presented were very specific about mother roles and father roles. How does this change with same-sex couples?
So that's actually a good question. You get into some more specific questions and requirements with same-sex couples, depending on biological connection to the child, parental relationships. So it's something that I think we would need to dig into a little bit further separately outside of the scope of the call. But as long as but same-sex parents are afforded the same rights as opposite-sex couples, and generally speaking, as long as one parent is a U.S. citizen and meets the requirements, they'll be able to transmit citizenship to their children.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you present a case individually if you don't quite meet the physical presence requirements but have strong ties to U.S. family and country?
I'm not aware of any option there. Generally speaking, the U.S. citizen parent will have to meet the physical presence requirement. Alternatively, if a U.S. Citizen grandparent can meet the physical presence requirements and all the other requirements are met, you may be able to obtain citizenship for your child that way.
Great, thank you. I heard it's easier for a foreign-born child to renounce U.S. citizenship at age 18 if they do not have a Social Security number, U.S. passport, etc. True or false? Have a newborn baby in the family would be eligible for the CRBA, but parents are not eager to give their child with U.S. citizenship.
So as far as renunciation, I'm not sure that having the Social Security number and U.S. passport make a huge difference. If the child does qualify for U.S. citizenship where they acquired it at birth, again, they're going to be a U.S. citizen automatically. So you can apply for the CRIBA, you can apply for a U.S. passport if you do anticipate having any travel to the U.S. But I'm not sure that having those documents would make a huge impact on renunciation. It's more just practical requirements for say travel to the U.S. or that sort of thing.
Okay. Olivier, anything to add on that one?
No, I don't see getting a social security number or US passport as making a difference in the case of a renunciation. In the case of a relinquishment, it might, but we will typically think about an adult because there needs to be this question of intent. So if you perform an expatriating act, such as acquiring a foreign citizenship with the intent of giving up US citizenship, then acquiring a US passport afterwards would show that your intent was not actually to give up US citizenship because you still considered yourself to be a US citizen. So it's a technical difference. In most cases, people go for a renunciation. The benefit of a relinquishment is that the certificate of loss of nationality would be backdated to the time of the expatriating act. But going back to that question, in the case of renunciation, it does not make any difference.
Okay. Next question. Can I file as head of household in my return if my wife and children don't have social security numbers?
If your spouse is a non-resident alien, then you would be considered unmarried, quote unquote, for the purpose of head of household filing status. So yes, someone who's married to a non-resident alien with a child can file as head of household.
And so the child does not need a social security number either to.
I mean, you would get a social security number for the child to claim the additional child tax credit and head of household. So the spouse would not need one if that's a non-resident alien, typically don't, but you would need to get a social security number for the child.
How old can the child be to qualify for the child tax credit?
All right, they will need to be under the age of 17 at the end of the year.
There were posts on Instagram stating a child born abroad as a U.S. citizen with a consulate certificate and U.S. passport also had to register at Homeland Security. Is this true?
I'm not aware of that being a requirement. They're a U.S. citizen, by default, just by having their U.S. passport and their CRIBA. So, no, I'm not aware of any specific requirements there.
Yeah, so that's the first time I've heard of that, and none of us have ever had to register with anything other than just we have our passports and we file our taxes. I've been living in Denmark for the last 15 years. I've never filed a tax return. Do I have to file a return even if I have never earned any money in the USA? Olivier.
Yes, you're supposed to. And a lot of people don't. You won't have tax owing. The tax rate in Denmark is higher than the US. Foreign tax credit would fully offset the US tax liability. But yes, you're supposed to file a tax return. The additional child tax credit is great. If you ever wanted to sponsor your spouse to get a green card, you would have to prove your income. The only way that USCIS will accept is a US tax return. So you might be able to live a normal life without filing a tax return. You wouldn't be compliant with US tax law. You might be foregoing the additional child tax credit if you're eligible for that. And if you were to seek immigration benefits for your spouse or child, USCIS would request US tax returns at that point.
I was understood too. Thank you. When would my child have to file an FBAR?
Once they have more than $10,000 in foreign bank accounts, just like anybody else.
Right. And that's aggregate, that's across all bank accounts.
Yes, it's the aggregate maximum balance. So if you have $7,000 in an account, you move $6,000 to another account, the maximum balance is $7,000 and $6,000, the sum of which is $13,000. You would have to file an FBAR, even though you never actually had $10,000. So yeah.
The irony of it, you feel rich when you file the FBAR sometimes.
Right.
So next, can a U.S. citizen parent with a non-U.S. spouse obtain the ACTC by filing married filing separately, or does the non-U.S. spouse also have to file with the IRS?
No, there's no reason to file jointly in this case, but the head of household filing status is probably better than married filing separately. You can make an election to bring the spouse into the US tax system and then to elect to be treated as a US person and therefore file as married filing jointly, it's absolutely possible. 99% of the time, that's not the best way to go about it. We leave the non-US spouse outside of the US tax system by filing as married filing separately, or more likely as head of household.
Right. I had a my personal situation where my husband remained on my tax return because he had lived in the US and he remained on for years. And then suddenly we found ourselves in a taxable situation because of his income. And I needed to quickly get him off. So I agree that it's a good idea to not have the
1% of the time when married filing jointly makes sense is if the US citizen has a lot of income
right.
and would otherwise have tax owing, the spouse doesn't have any income, then married filing jointly would bring lower tax brackets and could offset the tax owing. So 99% of the time, married filing jointly doesn't make sense. The 1% of the time is when there's an income differential in the opposite way of what you
Right.
encounter.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. My child will be adopted internationally, but our family resides abroad and not in the US. Could my child become a US citizen while living abroad?
I believe they may be eligible for that under the Form N600K option. But I would actually recommend speaking to somebody to confirm that, because sometimes there are some specifics to adoption cases that you may want to work out.
Charles, when you say, people need to check it out, people need to speak to someone,
Yeah.
who exactly would you recommend?
I would recommend a qualified immigration attorney. Somebody who can sit down with you and look at the specific situation and what options may be available to confirm whether your child qualifies for U.S. citizenship at birth, or whether they're eligible to apply for it through another route.
Is this something that an embassy would be able to competently answer?
I'm not sure that the embassy will really do a whole lot, especially for alternative routes for citizenship if it's not acquired at birth. You can always check their website to see if they have any additional information that may help provide guidance on it. Same thing for USCIS, the immigration agency in the US. They can have guidance as well on the types of forms, such as the N600K that you would file, and whether your child may be eligible for US citizenship that way.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Back up. I'm a dual UK-US citizen, and we adopted our British-born son when he was age 6. There is not blood relation between us. I never thought of getting him US citizenship when he was younger, but now he's 19. He's pressing me to see what I can do. Is this situation at all possible, and have I missed my chance?
So yeah, this one, this is another one. I would say now that he's 19, he may not be eligible for U.S. citizenship. Again, the Form N600K option is for children under 18. Same thing with the expedited naturalization option. The requirements have to be satisfied before the age of 18. So if you wanted to schedule a consultation with a U.S. immigration attorney, they could review and let you know if there are any options. But just initially, I'm not sure that there is one at this point.
Right, thank you. My US, UK citizenship children have trusts that were set up by their UK grandparents. Would they need to file US taxes under their name? These are trusts.
Yes, once they receive distributions, then Form 3520 and the tax return will be filed. If they're just a beneficiary of a non-grantor trust without receiving distributions yet, then they would not have to file.
Okay. I know trusts are sticky.
Right.
I know, so, okay. Can a child of a U.S. citizen parent who does not fulfill the residency requirements attain a CRBA through the U.S. citizenship grandparent?
So generally speaking, the CRBA should only be available for children who acquire U.S. citizenship at birth abroad. So if they're claiming citizenship through their grandparents' physical presence in the U.S., again, filing the Form N600K, I don't believe a CRBA is an option for them.
I'm a U.S. citizen living in Germany with my family, and my child is adopted and currently 16 years old. I would like to understand how he may acquire U.S. citizenship. Does his situation follow a different legal process? Again, okay, so we've sort of discussed that. Charles, you want to just sort of reiterate?
Yeah, so if only the child's father is a U.S. citizen, I would have to look into whether adoption, would fall under, since it's really just, it says blood relationship on the requirements. I don't know that they would allow adoption to fall under that. Probably not, because the child wouldn't have been a U.S. citizen at birth. Um,
Mhm.
but there may be an option through the form N600K, especially if they have a U.S. grandparent as well, not while the child is under 18, who meets the physical presence requirement.
I have a question. Is there a fee? I know that at birth we get our passports, and our social security numbers for our children, and there's just the fee to pay the passport, if I understand correctly. If you go any other route, are there fees?
Yeah, usually there's some sort of a filing fee. So if you file, any forms with the U.S. government, if you plan to move to the U.S. and you get an immigrant visa for your child, typically there's going to be some sort of fee involved.
Okay. Are they exorbitant? Do you know?
I would have to double check to see what they are today. I can't promise they're low, but hopefully they're not too exorbitant.
Okay. Apparently I skipped someone's question. They're sort of scolding me. I apologize. I'm trying to, I have the questions as they're upvoted in front of me, and we are working as a team. So I apologize if I didn't get to your question. If you can put it back up there, I appreciate it. Next, I am an American living in France, and I have filed my US taxes every year since my son was born, but I have never received a child tax credit. My son is now 8. Am I able to retrieve this benefit for previous years when I didn't receive it?
Yes, 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 absolutely. As long as he has his social security number during these years, you can go back to 2022, amend the tax returns to claim the additional child tax credit.
Sure. Thank you. Next, do I have to file the FBAR even if the money is in my non-US wife's account, but I have the power of attorney to access her account?
Yes, yes, absolutely. There's three categories of accounts on the FBAR. The first one is accounts owned individually, i.e., your bank account. The second one would be accounts owned jointly when you have a joint account with your spouse, typically. And the third one is when you have signature authority but no financial interest, which could be an employee having the authority to pass transaction on their employer's account, or it can be what you described when you have a power of attorney on somebody else's account, a spouse or otherwise. So yes, yes, if you did not have that power of attorney, then that account would not be reported, would not be counted towards the $10,000. But once you have the power of attorney, that will be reported on the FBAR as a signature authority, but no financial interest.
Okay, great. Someone just said they had to hop on and off, miss some of the core content. Both kids got social security numbers in January. This person files married filing separately, is in Canada. If I claim my children on my US return this year, will I get the extra tax credit, and what is the amount?
So the Social Security number would have to be issued before December 31st, 2025.
Hmm.
And right, so if they're referring to January 2026, they would not get it for prior years, but starting in 2026, they'll be able to request it. The amount would be $1,700 US, provided that they have earned income of at least $15,000.
Great, thank you. If a grandparent files the N600K, how would the child enter the US with the US parent, non-immigrant visa?
So, if the U.S. parent would need to be the one that files the N600K, in this case, And then, yes, so if they don't have, some other type of way to enter the U.S., chances are they would need to go to the embassy or consulate and apply for a B visa, a visitor visa. And there's a specific section, of the B visa rules that allow you to apply based on going to the U.S. for the USCIS interview. The main thing that you just want to be aware of is that the interviewing officer would want to see that the family lives outside of the U.S., that you plan to stay, outside of the U.S., and you're just going in for the interview, and then, if needed, the oath ceremony, and then returning, home.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is a couple with a common law marriage, this is in Spain, considered to be married in the U.S.? That would be the equivalent of a pax, I believe, in France.
Right. No, there's a provision that says that marriage and arrangement that are similar to marriage under US law would be married, but in every instances that I've seen, common law would not be recognized as such, and so these people will still file as single.
Okay, thank you. If my children are part of a family RESP in Canada, I don't know what that is, do we need to file an FBAR for them each year?
I'm not sure what they're referring to, but
A family RESP, a family RESP?
oh, an RESP, yes.
Right, okay.
Yes. If you have an RESP, that would be an account reported on the FBAR. So once you meet the $10,000 threshold, all of your accounts will need to be reported.
Okay. We looked into it once and found that even if we owe no tax, there is Social Security and Medicare to pay if we file with the FTC versus none with the federal, the income exclusion. That mostly cancels out the ACTC, doesn't it?
Right. So if you're self-employed and you live in a country that does not have a totalization agreement with the US, you will be liable for self-employment tax. And the self-employment tax is 15.3%. You would pay both the employer and the employee side of it when you're self-employed. So yes, depending on the circumstances, that amount of tax owing might exceed the additional child tax credit. So you can either move to a country that has totalization agreement with the US or work for a foreign employer, including a corporation that you would create. So for people who make more than, let's say, $50,000, creating a foreign corporation and becoming an employee of that corporation would exempt them from having to pay Social Security tax.
But that might open them up to other taxes. Is that not true? Like the GILTI?
Yes. So under that setup, they would pay themselves wages to bring net income down to zero. If the foreign corporation doesn't have any net income, then then sub-RF and gilt income would not apply. If you leave money inside of the corporation, you'll be subject to sub-RF and gilt income, which would defeat the purpose. So yes, that's why I'm saying if you're making less than $50,000, that's just pay the self-employment tax. For amount in excess, there is that structure. But yes, you're absolutely correct. That needs to be planned carefully. In particular, bring net income down to zero by paying yourself wages so that sub-RF and gilt income don't apply. Yes.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Would it please be possible to review the questions in order that they were asked? Right, I'm sorry. I apologize with Zoom, it's a little confusing because every time someone posts a question, we get down to the bottom question. And I don't see that happen sometimes. So again, I apologize. If our son gets US citizenship, will he be taxed on money he inherits here in Europe? What is the max he can inherit before he's taxed by the US? Would you like to answer that, Olivier? Do you know it?
Yes. I mean, there's the lifetime exemption of about $10 million. I would have to check what the amount is. So Yes, the executor of the estate would file Form 709, and if no gift tax return was filed while alive, the lifetime exemption would stay intact, and my clients typically have less than $10 million. So that would not be an issue. So yes, gift/estate tax return would still need to be filed, but unless you meet the lifetime exemption, there wouldn't be any extra tax owing.
Okay, so the same rules apply for American citizens living abroad as American citizens who are actually living in America.
Correct.
Okay. How do we find out if our child born abroad is automatically considered a U.S. citizen, even though we've not registered him anywhere in the U.S.? We did talk about that, about contacting an immigration lawyer, if I understood correctly.
That's right. And you can look to see if, depending on whether one or both parents are U.S. citizens, whether the requirements we went over are met, most likely. If they are met, then your child's probably a U.S. citizen at birth and will have been one, if depending on how old they are now, if they're 10 or 11, what have you, they'll have been one the whole time.
Exactly. Would an affidavit from a family member qualify as proof that you were in the U.S.? I have 4 years of university study and a year that I was working as a nanny for a family and friends.
An affidavit can certainly help. I think, to the extent that you have anything, any evidence of your work as a nanny as well, whether it's like invoices to the family or to friends for anybody else, some other proof of your time in the U.S., flight records, if you did any sort of just tourist travel in the U.S., that sort of thing, on vacation, something like that, that would be helpful as well. I think you're going to want to bring more supporting documents with you too.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the Freedom of Information Act request with a CBP would give you the times you entered and left the US.
Okay, great. I'm just going to take one more question. We're almost at the half hour. And remember, and also for the questions, I don't know if I made this clear, but I am looking at the ones that have been upvoted. I'm not going in the order they've been asked. And that might have been some of the confusion about the questions too. Do I need to be physically in the US with my children to file for their citizenship with the N600K with their grandparents? You know that one?
Sorry, is this, I think I need to refresh the
Yeah,
page.
refresh it. It's at the top. Do I need to be physically in the US with my children to file for their citizenship with the N600K with their grandparents?
No, you can actually file that from abroad. And the main thing with the N600K is it's for U.S. citizen children who are residing with their parent abroad. If you're already in the U.S. or you plan to move to the U.S. Permanently, then you would want to take the expedited naturalization route if that applies.
Okay, great. We are going to stop the Q&A now. Thank you so much for asking the questions. I'd like to thank Olivier and Charles for the time that you were able to spend with us. We got a good, I think, 35 to 40 minutes of questions. This is very rare to be able to answer those. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen one last time just to ask you again, don't forget to fill in the feedback form. It helps us out so much. I'd like to give a shout out to Wyatt and to Rachel for the excellent support backstage for us. And that's it. Thank you again. And oops, I keep doing that. I'm gonna stop sharing. I've stopped sharing. Okay. Thank you again, both of you again, and we will see you all at a next webinar. Rachel, you can stop the recording.